The moment I walked into my late husband's study, the tension was palpable. My brother-in-law, Peter, sat behind James's oak desk, sorting through financial documents with an expensive fountain pen, checking off items on a handwritten list. My sister-in-law, Catherine, was cataloging the antique collection, her manicured fingers wrapped around a sterling silver letter opener from Vienna. They both froze when they saw me, their expressions shifting from concentration to practiced sympathy. Neither expected me to be out of bed, let alone standing straight-backed in the doorway, watching them inventory what they assumed would soon be theirs. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra for you. Emma, sweetheart, Catherine cooed, placing the letter opener down with deliberate gentleness. You should be resting. We're just trying to help organize things. Make the transition easier for you. I nodded silently, fingering the ornate key in my pocket, the key to the safe deposit box that contained the documentation of everything I'd moved, everything I'd protected, everything they didn't know existed. The fortune they were so desperately searching for had been quietly secured 3 months before James's unexpected heart attack, when he first shared his suspicions about his siblings' true intentions. I appreciate your concern, I replied, my voice steadier than it had been since the funeral. But I think I can handle my husband's affairs from here. Peter's smile tightened. Now, Emma, you're in no condition to deal with complex financial matters. James always said you had no head for business. What Peter didn't know was that before my husband's passing, I had already transferred our most valuable assets to offshore accounts, converted investments to digital holdings, and documented every family heirloom. While they divided up what they could see, the true wealth remained invisible to them, protected by a grieving widow they had severely underestimated. 6 months ago, my world collapsed when James clutched his chest during our morning coffee ritual and was gone before the ambulance arrived. We'd been married for 15 years, the successful investment banker and the former museum curator he'd met while evaluating an art acquisition. The whispers started at the funeral. I overheard Catherine telling a cousin how concerning it was that James had left everything to his second wife who never quite fit in. Peter had squeezed my shoulder a little too firmly and assured me he would handle all the complicated business matters. James and I had no children, making me the sole heir to the Montgomery estate, a fact that had never sat well with his family. The Montgomerys were old money, with generations of carefully preserved and expanded wealth. I was the outsider, the woman who had trapped their golden son when he was vulnerable after his divorce from a family-approved first wife. What they never understood was that James and I had built a partnership based on mutual respect and shared values. While I had stepped away from my museum career after our marriage, I had never stopped learning. James had insisted on teaching me every aspect of financial management, investment strategy, and asset protection. Emma, my family sees money as power, he had told me one evening as we reviewed our portfolio. They were raised to preserve and control wealth, not to share it or use it for good. I need to know you can protect yourself and our legacy if anything happens to me. At the time, I thought he was being dramatic. The Montgomerys had always been cold toward me, but I attributed it to their general stuffiness rather than any malicious intent. It wasn't until James discovered Peter had been siphoning funds from the family foundation that we realized the extent of their greed. That night, 3 months before his death, we had formulated our plan. James transferred significant assets into my name alone. We moved our most valuable investments into new vehicles that his family couldn't trace. We documented every family heirloom that rightfully belonged to our household, taking photographs and securing appraisals. And most importantly, we created a detailed plan for the charitable foundation that would be our true legacy. The morning after the funeral, Catherine had arrived at our home with a platitude-filled speech about being there for family, and a team of people to help organize. By the end of the week, Peter had taken up residence in James's study, supposedly sorting through important papers. I had played my part perfectly, the grief-stricken widow, too overwhelmed to question their presence, too devastated to notice their methodical inventory of what they believed would soon be divided among proper family members. "Emma, dear," Catherine's voice pulled me back to the present moment as she approached me in the study doorway. "We've been talking with the family attorney. It might be easier for everyone if we handle the estate distribution informally between family. So much simpler than probate court." I bet it would be, I thought, maintaining my expression of mild confusion. "I thought James had everything arranged with Mr. Winters," I said, referring to our personal attorney, not the family lawyer. They'd consulted. "Edward Winters?" Peter scoffed. "He's hardly qualified to handle Montgomery affairs. We've worked with Hamilton and Associates for generations." I nodded as if considering this information. "I see. Well, I suppose I should look through James's papers myself before making any decisions." Catherine and Peter exchanged a quick glance that confirmed everything James had warned me about. "There's really no need," Peter said smoothly. "We've already found most of the important documents. The investments aren't performing as well as you might have hoped, I'm afraid. The market downturn hit James harder than he let on." The boldness of the lie almost made me laugh. I had checked our portfolio that morning. The investments were performing exceptionally well. Moreover, I had received confirmation that the transfers we had initiated months ago had all been completed successfully. "That's surprising to hear," I said carefully. "James always seemed so confident about our financial position." "Men like to project success," Catherine said with a practiced, sympathetic smile. "They don't like to worry their wives with financial troubles." I let her condescension wash over me, knowing that each patronizing comment was bringing me closer to the moment when I would reveal the truth. But that moment wasn't now. I needed to understand exactly how far they planned to go, exactly what they thought they could take from me while I was vulnerable. "I think I need to lie down," I said, pressing a hand to my forehead. "This is all so overwhelming." "Of course, dear," Catherine cooed, guiding me toward the door. "You rest. We'll take care of everything." "I'm sure you will," I thought as I retreated to our bedroom, the one room they hadn't yet attempted to inventory. Once there, I locked the door and retrieved my laptop from its hiding place. I had emails to send, calls to make. The pieces were already in motion, but it was time to accelerate our plan. The next morning, I came downstairs to find Peter and Catherine huddled with two more family members, James's cousin William and his wife Diane. They fell silent as I entered the kitchen, 4 pairs of eyes tracking my movement as I made my coffee. "Emma," William said, standing to kiss my cheek with cold formality. "How are you holding up?" Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "James knew you had no head for these matters. That's why he always handled the finances." I let his condescension wash over me, feeding the fire of resolution that had been building since I'd first discovered their true intentions. James had been right about everything. His siblings saw me as nothing more than an interloper who had temporarily diverted family assets. In their minds, his death was simply a correction of an unfortunate detour in the Montgomery wealth stream. "You're probably right," I said with a self-deprecating smile. "But I promised James I would try to understand these things better. Perhaps you could explain the documents to me over dinner tomorrow. One last family meal before everyone returns to their own homes." The invitation caught them off guard. They had expected resistance or continued passive acceptance, not an extension of hospitality. "That's very kind of you, Emma," William said after an awkward pause. "We'd be delighted." "Wonderful," I replied, moving toward the staircase. "I'll prepare everything. Let's say 7 o'clock?" As I climbed the stairs, I could hear their hushed conversation resume. They were undoubtedly congratulating themselves on managing the situation so smoothly, on the grieving widow's unexpected cooperation. They had no idea what awaited them at tomorrow's dinner. In the privacy of my bedroom, I opened the folder and examined the documents they had prepared. As expected, they were breathtakingly audacious. Transfer forms for artwork, jewelry, and investment accounts that had nothing to do with the Montgomery family legacy, and everything to do with James's and my marital assets. The documents were designed to appear routine while effectively stripping me of nearly everything of value. I took photographs of each page, sending them to Mr. Winters with a brief message. As predicted, all systems go for tomorrow. His response came minutes later. Everything is prepared. The team will be ready. I spent the rest of the evening reviewing our plan, checking every detail to ensure nothing had been overlooked. James had taught me to be methodical, to anticipate all possible scenarios. In finance and in family matters, he had said, always prepare for the unexpected. The unexpected in this case would be a grieving widow who refused to be victimized, who had, in fact, already outmaneuvered her predatory in-laws before they even made their first move. As I prepared for bed, I glanced at James's photograph on my nightstand. "You were right about them," I whispered. "And you were right about me, too. I'm stronger than they think." I could almost see his proud smile, hear his voice saying what he had told me countless times. "Emma, your compassion is a strength, not a weakness. But never let anyone mistake your kindness for naivety." Tomorrow, the Montgomerys would discover just how much they had underestimated the woman James had chosen to be his wife. The morning of the dinner, I moved with purposeful efficiency. First, I visited my safe deposit box, retrieving the documents we would need for the evening's revelations. Then, I met with Mr. Winters to review our strategy one final time. "They'll try to discredit you emotionally," he warned as we sat in his office. "They'll suggest grief has impaired your judgment." "I know," I replied calmly. James prepared me for exactly that argument. Mr. Winters nodded, his expression solemn. James was always 10 steps ahead, especially when it came to protecting you. By late afternoon, I had returned home to prepare for dinner. I cooked James's favorite meal, beef Wellington with roasted vegetables and his mother's recipe for apple tart. It seemed fitting for what would be the final Montgomery family gathering in our home. At precisely 7 o'clock, the doorbell rang. I smoothed my black dress, touched the sapphire earrings James had given me on our 10th anniversary, and went to greet my guests. They arrived as a unified front: Peter and Catherine, William and Diane, and to my mild surprise, James's cousin Rebecca and her husband Thomas. Rebecca had always been the least hostile of the Montgomery relatives, occasionally showing me genuine kindness. Her presence suggested they wanted additional family witnesses to whatever they had planned. "Emma, you look recovered," Catherine commented with a tight smile, her eyes cataloging my appearance for signs of weakness. "Thank you," I replied, accepting their perfunctory embraces and leading them to the dining room. Cooking has always been therapeutic for me. The table was set with the fine china they had inventoried just days before. The china they had, designated as family property to be returned to the main estate. I watched their eyes flicker over the place settings, the silent calculations visible in their expressions. "Wine?" I offered, holding up a bottle from James's collection, another item they had marked for redistribution. "How thoughtful," Peter said with a trace of irritation. "Is that the Bordeaux from the cellar collection?" "Yes," I replied innocently. James always said it was perfect for special occasions. Dinner progressed with strained conversation. They made polite inquiries about my well-being while exchanging meaningful glances across the table. I responded with appropriate gratitude for their support during this difficult time, watching as they grew increasingly comfortable with what they perceived as my continued compliance. As I served dessert, Peter cleared his throat and placed a folder beside his plate. "Emma, we've prepared the final documentation we discussed. Just a few signatures to formalize everything." "Of course," I said, serving the apple tart with steady hands. "But before we address those papers, I have something I'd like to share with all of you." I retrieved my own folder from the sideboard, a thick portfolio with the Winters & Associates logo embossed on the cover. The sudden appearance of my personal attorney's materials caused a visible shift in the atmosphere. "What's this?" William asked sharply. "As well as can be expected," I replied, noting the spread of papers across my kitchen table. "What's all this?" "Just sorting through some family matters," Diane answered vaguely. "Nothing for you to worry about." I glanced at the papers, immediately recognizing lists of the Montgomery family art collection, pieces that had been in our home for years, that James and I had carefully maintained and insured. "Are those the catalogs for the art pieces?" I asked innocently. Peter cleared his throat. "Yes, we're just updating the family inventory. Several pieces should really be returned to the main family estate for proper preservation." "I see," I said, sipping my coffee. "And who decides which pieces those are?" An uncomfortable silence fell over the kitchen. These vultures had been circling for days, waiting for me to be too broken by grief to fight back. They expected me to be helpless, financially illiterate, and easily manipulated. James had warned me this would happen. "Emma," Catherine finally said, her voice gentle but firm. "Some of these pieces have been in the Montgomery family for generations. They were only on loan to James for his lifetime." This was a blatant. James had inherited those pieces outright, and they were legally part of our marital property. But I simply nodded, maintaining my facade of naive grief. "I didn't realize," I said softly. "James never mentioned that." The relief on their faces was almost comical. They thought I was giving in, that their strategy of overwhelming the grieving widow was working. Little did they know that each item they cataloged, each asset they attempted to claim, was being documented as evidence of their attempted theft. "Why don't I make us all some fresh coffee?" I offered, moving toward the kitchen counter. As I waited for the water to boil, I sent a quick text to Mr. Winters. "They're making their move. Time for phase 2. Over the next 3 days, I watched as James's family systematically divided my home and possessions among themselves. They were clever about it, disguising their theft as concern and support. Catherine took a particular interest in my jewelry collection, suggesting that several pieces should be properly secured in the family vault. William focused on James's rare book collection, claiming expertise in preservation that I supposedly lacked. Diane inventoried the silverware and china, declaring that certain sets were Montgomery heirlooms that should remain with blood relatives. All the while, I played my part, the grieving widow too overwhelmed to protest, too naive to understand what was happening. I accepted their thinly veiled suggestions with quiet acquiescence, watching as they became bolder with each unchallenged appropriation. A week after the funeral, I returned from a supposed therapy appointment to find them in the living room, surrounded by neatly labeled boxes and detailed lists. "Emma," Peter said, standing as I entered. "We've made good progress today. I think we have everything sorted." I glanced around the room, taking in the systematic dismantling of the home James and I had built together. They had even taken the photographs from our wedding, claiming they were family events that should be archived with other Montgomery memories. "Everything sorted," I repeated softly. "That's efficient." Catherine approached, placing a manicured hand on my arm. "We know this is difficult, but it's what James would have wanted, for the family legacy to be preserved." I looked into her eyes, searching for any genuine belief in her words. There was none, just calculation and the satisfaction of acquisition. "And what about James's wishes for me?" I asked, my voice still gentle but with the first hint of steel beneath. A flicker of annoyance crossed Catherine's face before she composed herself. James always said you were independent. I'm sure he made some provisions. And of course, you'll always be welcome at family gatherings. The patronizing tone was the final confirmation I needed. In their minds, I had served my purpose as James's companion. Now that he was gone, I was to be discarded with minimal compensation, whatever scraps they deemed appropriate for the woman who had only been his wife for 15 years. How thoughtful, I said, maintaining my composure. When do you plan to move these boxes? William has arranged for transportation tomorrow, Peter replied, clearly relieved by my continued passivity. We thought it best to handle everything quickly to spare you the prolonged distress. How considerate of them to speedily rob me while I grieved. I see, I nodded. And the family attorney? Has he prepared documents for me to sign? Peter's expression brightened. This was exactly what they had hoped for. My willing cooperation in their theft. Yes, just some simple transfer forms, he said, retrieving a folder from James's desk, my desk now, though they had clearly forgotten that fact. Nothing complicated, just acknowledging that certain items are returning to the family collection. I accepted the folder with a small smile. I'll look these over tonight. Catherine frowned slightly. There's really no need to trouble yourself. With the legal language, it's all standard procedure. Even so, I said, clutching the folder to my chest. I'd like to read anything I'm signing. James always insisted on that. A flash of irritation crossed Peter's face. Just some documents James prepared before his passing, I explained, opening the folder. He wanted to ensure there was no confusion about our affairs. Catherine's smile had disappeared entirely. We've already sorted through James's papers. There's nothing that would override the family arrangements. Actually, I said, my voice gaining strength, these aren't family arrangements. They're legal documents James and I prepared together, detailing our marital assets and his explicit wishes for their distribution. I removed the first document, a detailed inventory of every artwork, piece of jewelry, and collectible in our home, complete with photographs, appraisals, and clear documentation of ownership. As you can see, I continued, passing copies around the table, each item is clearly designated as either James's separate property, my separate property, or our marital property. Items belonging to the Montgomery Family Trust are noted as such, though there are remarkably few of them as it happens. Peter's face had flushed deep red. This is absurd. These designations don't override family legacy. Actually, they do when supported by purchase records, inheritance documentation, and gift declarations, I replied, removing another stack of papers from the folder. As you can see here, the Monet you've labeled for Return to the Family Collection was purchased by James and me on our 10th anniversary. The silver service you've boxed up was a wedding gift to us from James's colleagues at Goldman Sachs. The first edition books William is so concerned about preserving were actually purchased by me as birthday gifts for James over the years. The silence around the table was deafening. Rebecca was the first to speak, her voice quiet but clear. I told you this was wrong, she said, looking at Peter. I said Emma deserved better than this. Peter ignored her, fixing me with a cold stare. Where are the investment documents? The financial accounts? James controlled millions in family investments. Did he? I asked innocently. That's interesting, because according to our financial records, all properly filed with the SEC and IRS, James and I maintained separate accounts from the Montgomery family investments. In fact, 3 months before his death, we completed a full audit to ensure everything was properly segregated. Catherine's hand trembled as she set down her wine glass. That's impossible. James managed all the family accounts. No, I corrected gently. James managed his and my accounts. Peter has been managing the family trust for the past 5 years. something you all know perfectly well. I turned to Peter, whose face had grown ashen. Which brings us to an interesting discovery James made shortly before his death. Discrepancies in the family foundation accounts. Withdrawals that couldn't be explained, investments that didn't match the foundation's mission statement. "How dare you?" Peter hissed, pushing back from the table. "You have no right to access those records." "I didn't," I replied calmly. "James did. As a trustee, he had every right to review the foundation's books. What he found disturbed him deeply, enough that we took steps to protect our personal assets from what he feared might be coming." I removed the final document from my folder, a formal forensic accounting report. This analysis details approximately $3.2 million diverted from the Montgomery Family Foundation to offshore accounts over the past 3 years. The accountants were able to trace the authorizations back to your personal computer, Peter. The dining room erupted into chaos. Peter shouted accusations. Catherine dissolved into tears. William demanded to see the documents, and Diane simply sat frozen, her dessert untouched before her. Through it all, Rebecca watched me with what appeared to be a mixture of shock and respect. When the initial explosion had subsided, I continued with the same calm demeanor. "I've invited Mr. Winters to join us. He should be arriving momentarily, to answer any questions about the legal implications of these findings." As if on cue, the doorbell rang. Catherine flinched at the sound. "While I get the door," I said, standing, "you might want to look at the final page of the report. It details the steps James and I took to secure our assets upon discovering the foundation discrepancies." I left them poring over the documents, their expressions ranging from outrage to horror as they realized the full extent of what had happened. James and I hadn't just documented our possessions. We had systematically moved our most valuable assets beyond their reach, establishing irrevocable trusts, creating a private foundation of our own, and transferring investments to new vehicles. They couldn't access or control. When I returned with Mr. Winters, Peter was on his feet, his face contorted with rage. "You conniving little gold digger," he spat. "You turned James against his own family." Mr. Winters stepped forward. "I would advise against making further defamatory statements, Mr. Montgomery. They could complicate your already precarious legal position." "Legal position?" William asked, his voice unsteady. "What are you talking about?" "Mrs. Montgomery has filed a formal complaint regarding the unauthorized removal of her personal property," Mr. Winters explained, his tone professionally neutral. "She has also notified the Foundation Board about the financial irregularities discovered by her late husband. They've authorized a full investigation, which will commence tomorrow." The color drained from Peter's face. "You can't do this. The family will be ruined." "Not the family," I corrected softly. "Just those who abused their positions of trust." Catherine stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the hardwood floor. "We should go," she said to Peter, her earlier confidence completely evaporated. "Now." The evening concluded with their hasty departure, leaving behind the boxes they had so carefully packed with my possessions. Only Rebecca lingered, approaching me after the others had gone. "James always said you were stronger than anyone knew," she said quietly. "I should have warned you what they were planning, but I didn't think you'd believe me over family." I studied her face, seeing genuine regret in her expression. "Would you have believed me if I had told you what Peter was doing with the foundation money?" She sighed, acknowledging the truth of my question. "No, probably not. Family loyalty runs deep in the Montgomerys, sometimes too deep." "James understood that better than anyone," I replied. "It's why he taught me to protect myself." After she left, Mr. Winters helped me review next steps. The Foundation Board would conduct their investigation. The items Peter and the others had attempted to remove would be formally documented and returned to their proper places in my home. The legal proceedings would be discreet but thorough. "James would be proud of how you handled this," Mr. Winters said as he gathered his papers. "He always said you were his best investment." Alone in the house that night, I wandered from room to room, touching the objects James's family had so eagerly divided among themselves. The antique globe he had loved, the first edition Hemingway I had searched 3 years to find for him, the hand-carved chess set from our trip to Russia. Each item held memories they could never understand or value. In our bedroom, I opened the safe hidden behind James's favorite painting, a small watercolor I had painted on our honeymoon. Inside was a letter he had written in those final months, to be opened after his death. "My dearest Emma," it began. "If you're reading this, then our fears were realized. I'm gone, and my family has shown their true colors. But you've already proven you're stronger than they could ever imagine. The wealth we've built is important, but it's not our legacy. Our legacy is how we use it to make a difference." The letter continued, outlining his hopes for the foundation we had created together, the Montgomery Clark Foundation for Arts Education, designed to provide opportunities for underprivileged children. It would be funded by the bulk of our estate, with provision for my comfortable living and the continued support of causes we both believed in. "They never understood what true wealth is," his letter concluded. "It's not what you have, but what you build together, what you leave behind that matters. You were the best decision I ever made, Emma. Trust yourself as I have always trusted you." 6 months after that fateful dinner, I stood on the steps of the newly established Montgomery Clark Arts Center, cutting the ribbon at its grand opening. Children from the local schools had already filled the classrooms inside, eagerly exploring the art supplies, musical instruments, and performance spaces we had created. Rebecca stood beside me, having broken ranks with the family to support the foundation's work. Peter was awaiting trial for embezzlement. Catherine and the others had retreated to their separate lives, their attempts to contact me ceasing after their legal maneuvers had failed. As I watched the children discover the joy of creation, I felt James's presence beside me. He had taught me not just how to protect our wealth, but how to use it meaningfully. While his family had been dividing what they could see, they had missed the true value of what we had built, not just financial security, but purpose and legacy. The grief still came in waves, but it no longer threatened to drown me. Instead, it had become part of the current carrying me forward, toward the future James and I had planned together. A future his family had never been able to imagine or appreciate. In their rush to divide what they could see, they had missed the invisible wealth that mattered most, the legacy we would leave behind, the lives we would touch, and the strength I had discovered within myself along the way. The weeks following the dinner confrontation brought a flurry of legal activity. Peter hired an aggressive attorney who specialized in family disputes, attempting to challenge James's and my financial arrangements on grounds that I had unduly influenced James during his final months. His desperate claims painted me as a manipulative outsider who had taken advantage of James's declining health, a particularly cruel accusation given how sudden and unexpected my husband's heart attack had been. "They're grasping at straws," Mr. Winters reassured me during one of our frequent meetings. "The documentation is impeccable. James made sure every transfer, every decision was properly witnessed and recorded." He was right, of course. James had been meticulous, anticipating his family's potential arguments and addressing them before they could be raised. Medical records clearly showed he had been in excellent health until the heart attack. Multiple witnesses, our financial advisors, attorneys, even friends, could testify to his mental clarity and deliberate planning. The transfers and trusts we'd established had been created with careful attention to every legal requirement. Still, the process was draining. Each day seemed to bring a new demand for documents, a new accusation, another attempt to portray me as the villain in the Montgomery family story. "How long can they drag this out?" I asked Mr. Winters one afternoon, as we reviewed yet another filing from Peter's attorney. "Not much longer," he assured me, his confidence unwavering. "Judge Alderman has scheduled a hearing for next week. Given the evidence, I expect she'll dismiss their claims entirely." True to his prediction, the judge did dismiss their case, delivering a pointed rebuke to Peter and his siblings for wasting the court's time with baseless accusations. But their legal defeat only intensified their personal attacks. Rumors began circulating among their social circle, insinuations that I had somehow contributed to James's death, that our marriage had been failing, that James had confided his regrets to family members. I found myself avoided at charity events I'd attended for years. Former friends, mostly connections through the Montgomery family, stopped returning my calls. Even my favorite cafe, where James and I had spent countless Sunday mornings, became uncomfortable as conversations halted. When I entered, "They're trying to isolate you," observed Helen, my oldest friend, and one of the few people who stood firmly by my side throughout the ordeal. "It's another form of control. If they can't take your financial resources, they'll try to strip away your social ones." Helen had known me since college, long before I met James. She had no connection to the Montgomery world and no patience for their tactics. "Let them try," I replied, mustering more confidence than I felt. James always said, his family measured worth by bank accounts and social standing. It's why he distanced himself from them as much as politeness allowed. "Speaking of bank accounts," Helen said, stirring her coffee thoughtfully, "what exactly are you planning to do with all that carefully protected wealth? James must have had ideas beyond just keeping it from his greedy relatives." Her question touched on conversations James and I had had many times during our marriage. We had always planned to use our resources for more than just comfortable living. Unlike his family, who viewed wealth primarily as a means of maintaining status and influence, James had been deeply committed to the idea that privilege carried responsibility. "We had plans," I told Helen. "We were working on setting up a foundation before he died. Education, arts access for underserved communities, programs that combined my background in curation with his financial expertise." "So why not move forward with that?" Helen challenged. "The best revenge isn't just protecting what you have. It's using it exactly as James would have wanted in all the ways his family would have opposed." Her words resonated deeply. In the months since James's death, I had been focused on defense, protecting what we had built together from those who sought to take it. Perhaps it was time to shift to what James would call a growth strategy. That evening, I retrieved the file containing our early plans for the Montgomery Clark Foundation. James had been excited about the potential impact we could have, particularly in neighborhoods like the one where he had grown up before his parents' financial situation improved. He had never forgotten what it was like to be the scholarship kid, to have talent and ambition but limited access to resources. As I reviewed our notes and preliminary structure, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. This hadn't just been James's vision, it had been ours. Continuing this work wouldn't just honor his memory, it would fulfill promises we had made to each other about the kind of legacy we wanted to create. The next morning, I called Mr. Winters to schedule a meeting about formally establishing the foundation. His response surprised me. "James actually completed most of the preliminary paperwork," he informed me. He was waiting for the right time to finalize everything. Given what was happening with his discoveries about Peter and the family foundation, he wanted to be certain all the legal structures were in place before making any public announcements. A wave of emotion washed over me, grief mingled with profound gratitude for my husband's foresight. Even in this, he had tried to smooth the path for me. "What do we need to do to move forward?" I asked when I could trust my voice again. "Not much," Mr. Winters replied. "Review the mission statement and governance structure, confirm the initial funding allocation, and file the final paperwork. We could have the Montgomery Clark Foundation operational within 6 weeks." 6 weeks later, I stood in the empty storefront that would become the foundation's first neighborhood arts center. The building was in a part of the city that the Montgomery family would never visit. a working-class neighborhood with limited access to arts education after years of school budget cuts. The space needed considerable renovation, but I could already envision what it would become. Bright studios for painting and sculpture, practice rooms for music, a small performance space for community events. "Mrs. Montgomery?" A voice interrupted my thoughts. I turned to find a middle-aged man in a flannel shirt and jeans watching me curiously. "I'm Ray Mendoza, the contractor your project manager hired. Thought I'd come by and introduce myself before we start tearing down walls tomorrow." "Mr. Mendoza, wonderful to meet you." I extended my hand, which he shook firmly. "And please, call me Emma." He nodded, looking around the space with a professional eye. "My daughter took art classes before they cut the program at her school. When I heard what this place was going to be, I made sure we got the bid." "Your daughter is interested in art?" I asked, genuinely curious. "Maria's been drawing since she could hold a crayon," he said, his face softening with pride. "Got real talent, according to her teachers. Been hard to find ways to help her develop it since the cuts." His words confirmed what James and I had believed, that there were talented young people throughout the city who simply lacked access to opportunities. The Montgomery family had always directed their charitable giving toward high-profile cultural institutions that bore donor plaques and offered gala events. They measured impact by social recognition, not by lives changed. "I hope Maria will be one of our first students," I told Mr. Mendoza. He smiled broadly. "She's already asking when she can sign up." As reconstruction began on the Arts Center, I turned my attention to staffing the foundation. I needed a team who shared our vision and understood the communities we hoped to serve. My first call was to Miguel Santos, a former colleague from my museum days who now ran arts education programs for the city's Parks Department. "Emma, I was so sorry to hear about James," he said when we met for lunch. "He was one of the good ones." "He was," I agreed, blinking back unexpected tears. Even months later, kindness sometimes hit harder than the hostility I'd faced from the Montgomery clan. "That's actually why I asked to meet. We were working on something before he died, and I'm moving forward with it now." As I outlined our vision for the foundation and the neighborhood art centers, Miguel's expression grew increasingly animated. "This is exactly what these communities need," he said, leaning forward eagerly. "The talent is there. I see it every day. But the resources, the consistent programming, the professional instruction, that's what's missing." "Would you be interested in coming on board?" I asked. "I need a program director who understands both the artistic and educational components." Miguel's eyes widened. "Are you serious? Emma, that would be, the impact we could have." "I'll take that as a yes," I laughed, feeling lighter than I had in months. With Miguel's acceptance, the foundation began to take shape. He helped recruit teaching artists, develop curriculum, and establish partnerships with local schools. Each decision we made felt like a step toward fulfilling the promise James and I had made to each other, to use our resources in ways that created meaningful opportunities. 3 months after our initial meeting, as construction on the Arts Center neared completion, I received an unexpected visitor at the foundation's temporary office. Rebecca, James's cousin, stood nervously in the reception area, looking out of place in her expensive clothing. "Emma," she said when I emerged from my office, "I hope I'm not interrupting." "Rebecca," I replied, genuinely surprised. She had been the only Montgomery family member to express any regret over their treatment of me, but she had still sided with them during the legal proceedings. "What brings you here?" "Could we talk privately?" she asked, glancing at the busy staff, members working around us. I led her to my office, curious about her purpose, but cautious after everything I'd experienced with the Montgomery family. Once the door closed behind us, Rebecca seemed to lose some of her composure. "I've left Thomas," she blurted out, referring to her husband of 20 years. "And I've resigned from the family foundation board." I gestured for her to sit, processing this unexpected information. Thomas had always seemed like the most bearable of the Montgomery spouses, quiet and somewhat detached from family politics. "What happened?" I asked. "The investigation into Peter's embezzlement. It turned up more than just his misconduct." She twisted her wedding ring anxiously. "Thomas was involved too. Not as deeply, but he knew. He helped cover it up." I waited, sensing there was more she needed to say. "When I confronted him, he didn't even deny it. He said it was family business and I should mind my own." Her voice hardened. 20 years of marriage, and he thought I would just look the other way while he stole from a charitable foundation. The pain in her expression was genuine. Whatever I had suffered at the hands of the Montgomery family, Rebecca was experiencing her own form of betrayal. "I'm sorry," I said, and meant it. "That must be incredibly difficult." She looked up, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "The thing is, Emma, watching you these past months, how you stood up to them, how you've created something meaningful despite everything they did, it made me realize I had choices too." Her words caught me off guard. I had been so focused on my own struggle against the family that I hadn't considered how my actions might affect others within their circle. "What will you do now?" I asked. "That's partly why I'm here," she admitted. "I need a fresh start, away from the Montgomery influence. I have some money of my own. Not a fortune, but enough. And I have experience in nonprofit administration from my work with the Family Foundation." I suddenly understood where this was heading. "Are you looking for a position with the Montgomery Clark Foundation?" She nodded, then hurried to add, "I know it's asking a lot, after everything. You have every reason to distrust anyone with the Montgomery name. But I'm not like them, Emma. I never was, really. I just wasn't brave enough to stand apart until now." I studied her, weighing her sincerity against my natural caution. James had always spoken more kindly of Rebecca than his other relatives, noting that she seemed trapped in a role rather than embracing the family's cutthroat values. "Why our foundation specifically?" I asked. "There are many nonprofits in the city." "Because I believe in what you're doing," she said simply. "The focus on arts education, on creating opportunities in underserved communities, it's what the Montgomery Foundation should have been doing all along, instead of funding vanity projects and society galas." Her answer resonated with conversations James and I had had many times. The foundation his parents had established had drifted far from its original mission under Peter's leadership, becoming more about maintaining the family's social position than creating meaningful impact. "I'll need to think about it," I told her honestly, "and discuss it with our board." She nodded, accepting my response without protest. "That's fair. All I ask is that you consider it." She stood to leave, then hesitated. "Regardless of your decision, I want you to know that what you've built here, James would be proud." After she left, I sat in my office for a long time, turning our conversation over in my mind. Rebecca's appearance had stirred complex emotions, reminders of the painful months after James's death, but also recognition of how far I had come since then. The foundation was taking shape in ways that exceeded even our initial vision. The first art center would open its doors in just a few weeks. We had already received more student applications than we could accommodate, necessitating plans for a second location sooner than anticipated. What had begun as a way to honor James's memory and defy his family's expectations had evolved into something with a life and purpose of its own. That evening, I visited James's grave for the first time since the funeral. I had avoided the cemetery, finding it easier to feel his presence in our home, in the work of the foundation, in the daily choices I made to carry forward what we had built together. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the carefully manicured grounds as I made my way to his headstone. Someone had placed fresh flowers recently, lilies, his favorite. For a moment, I wondered if Rebecca had visited, then dismissed the thought as unimportant. "Hello, love," I said softly, placing my own offering, a small sketch I had made of the nearly completed art center. Things are moving forward. The foundation, the art center, it's all happening just as we planned. The breeze rustled through, nearby trees, the only response in the quiet cemetery. Rebecca came to see me today. She's left Thomas, walked away from the family. Says she wants to work with our foundation. I smiled slightly, imagining James's raised eyebrow at this development. I haven't decided yet what to do about that. Part of me thinks it might be a Montgomery trick, but she seemed sincere. I sat on the small bench near his grave, watching the sunlight fade as I continued my one-sided conversation, updating him on the foundation's progress, Miguel's innovative programming ideas, the growing list of community partnerships we were establishing. "They thought I would crumble without you," I said finally, as dusk began to settle over the cemetery. "Your family, I mean. They saw me as an extension of you, with no identity or purpose of my own. They never understood what we built together, or who I was beyond being your wife." In the month since James's death, I had moved through grief, without ever fully emerging from it. There were still moments when I reached for him in the night, days when a sudden memory would leave me breathless with loss. But alongside the grief, something else had grown, a clarity of purpose, a confidence in my own capacity to carry forward not just James's legacy, but our shared vision. "I miss you every day," I whispered, touching the cold stone that bore his name. "But I'm doing what we planned, James. I'm making it real." As I walked back to my car in the gathering darkness, I felt a sense of resolution forming. Rebecca's appearance had been unexpected, but perhaps it represented an opportunity rather than a threat. If she was genuine in her desire to break from the Montgomery family's toxic influence, working with the foundation might offer her the fresh start she sought. And if her intentions proved less honorable, I was no longer the vulnerable widow they had tried to victimize. I could protect what James and I had built. The following week, as final preparations for the Art Center's opening ceremony were underway, I scheduled a meeting with Miguel and our other senior staff to discuss Rebecca's request. "A Montgomery working for our foundation?" Miguel asked, skeptically after I explained the situation. "After everything they tried to do to you?" "Rebecca was the least involved in their schemes," I clarified, "and she's taken significant steps to distance herself from the family." "Still," Lisa, our development director, interjected, "it could send a confusing message to have someone with that name associated with us, especially given the ongoing investigation into the Montgomery Family Foundation." Their concerns were valid and echoed my own initial hesitation. The Montgomery name carried both recognition and, increasingly, notoriety in our city. Peter's embezzlement case had made headlines, casting a shadow over the once-respected family foundation. "What if we offered her a probationary position?" suggested Darius, our operations manager. "Something that allows her to contribute but limits her access to sensitive information or decision-making until she's proven herself." I considered his suggestion. "That might work. She has experience that could be valuable, particularly in understanding the philanthropic landscape in the city. But you're right. We would need to establish clear boundaries." After further discussion, we agreed on a 3-month probationary role for Rebecca, focusing on community outreach, an area where her social connections could be beneficial without giving her access to financial operations or strategic planning. When I called to offer her the position, Rebecca's relief was palpable. "Thank you, Emma. I know trust has to be earned, especially after what my family did to you. I won't let you down." "I hope not," I replied frankly, "because this foundation represents something important to me and to James. I'll protect it, as fiercely as I protected our assets from your family's attempts to take them." "I understand," she said quietly, "and I respect that. I want to be part of something meaningful, something that actually helps people rather than just burnishing a family's social standing. The Montgomery name used to mean something in this city beyond just wealth and influence. I'd like to help restore that meaning, even if it's through supporting your work rather than theirs. Her words reminded me of conversations with James, who had often spoken of his grandparents' genuine commitment to public service, a value that had diminished with each successive generation until it became the hollow performance I had witnessed during my years as a Montgomery wife. 2 weeks later, the Montgomery Clark Arts Center opened its doors with a community celebration that filled the renovated space with music, art, and the excited voices of neighborhood children exploring. Studios equipped with materials many had never had access to before. I stood in the entrance, watching as Maria Mendoza, the contractor's daughter, led her friends through the painting studio, her face alight with possibility. Nearby, Miguel was explaining our scholarship program to a group of parents, emphasizing that financial barriers would not prevent any child with interest from participating. "You've created something remarkable here," a voice said beside me. I turned to find Rebecca, who had started her position the previous day and was attending her first foundation event. "James and I created it together," I corrected gently. "Even if he didn't live to see it completed." She nodded, her gaze taking in the bustling activity around us. "I've been to countless charity galas and donor events with the Family Foundation. I've never seen anything like this, something that actually changes lives directly, not just writes checks to maintain the status quo." As we stood watching the center come to life around us, I felt a complex mixture of emotions: pride in what we had accomplished, lingering grief for James's absence, and a growing sense that this work was not just about honoring his memory, but about creating something that would outlast both of us. The path from grieving widow to foundation director had not been one I would have chosen. The Montgomery family's attempts to strip me of what James and I had built together had forced me to find strength I hadn't known I possessed. Their assumption that I would be easy to manipulate, that I would surrender what was rightfully mine, out of grief or intimidation, had fundamentally misjudged who I was, who James and I had been together. In trying to divide our possessions while I grieved, they had inadvertently pushed me toward fulfilling the larger vision James and I had shared, one they had never understood or valued. The wealth they had so eagerly sought to claim was now being deployed in ways that challenged everything the Montgomery family had come to represent. As the evening progressed, I found myself drawn to the small gallery space where student artwork would eventually be displayed. For now, it held just one piece: a photograph of James and me at the museum benefit where we had first met, both of us laughing at something now forgotten. I had placed it there that morning, a private acknowledgement of the journey that had led to this moment. "We did it, love," I whispered to his image. "They thought they were taking everything from me while I grieved. They never imagined what we had already built together, what we would create." Behind me, the Arts Center hummed with activity, with potential, with the beginning of a legacy far more valuable than the possessions his family had tried to claim. In protecting what was mine, I had discovered something more important than wealth or assets. I had found purpose, and with it, a way forward through grief towards something new. The grand opening of the Montgomery Clark Arts Center exceeded all expectations. Over 300 people from the neighborhood attended, filling the renovated space with energy and enthusiasm. Children raced from room to room, eager to explore the art supplies, instruments, and performance spaces. Parents studied the program offerings, many signing up their children on the spot for classes that would begin the following week. I stood near the entrance, greeting visitors and watching as our vision materialized before my eyes. Miguel had outdone himself, recruiting talented teaching artists who connected instantly with the children. The renovation team, led by Ray Mendoza, had transformed the once-abandoned storefront into a vibrant community space, with natural light flooding through skylights they had insisted on adding to give the kids real light to create in. "This place is amazing," said a teenage girl who had been silently observing the painting studio. "Are the classes really free?" "They are," I confirmed, noting how she lingered by the door, not quite allowing herself to fully enter the space. "We have scholarships for anyone who wants to participate. Are you interested in art?" She nodded, still hesitant. "I used to take classes at school, but they cut the program last year." "Why don't I introduce you to Ms. Rivera?" I suggested, gesturing toward the young woman demonstrating watercolor techniques to a group of children. "She's teaching several of our teen classes." The girl, Zoe, I would later learn, followed me reluctantly into the studio. By the end of the conversation with Ms. Rivera, she had signed up for 2 classes and volunteered to help with the younger children's Saturday morning sessions. Moments like these were exactly what James and I had envisioned when planning the foundation. Not grand gestures of philanthropy designed for social recognition, but direct interventions that created immediate opportunities for people who would otherwise be overlooked. Each child who discovered new means of expression, each parent who realized their child's talent could be nurtured regardless of financial circumstances. These were the true measures of success, not the tax write-offs or gala photographs that had defined the Montgomery family's approach to charitable giving. As the celebration continued around me, I noticed Rebecca standing slightly apart, observing the interactions with a thoughtful expression. Her probationary period with the foundation had been going well so far. She had leveraged her social connections to secure additional funding and in-kind donations, and her genuine enthusiasm for the work seemed to grow with each passing week. "It's quite different from the Montgomery Foundation galas, isn't it?" I remarked, joining her. "In every possible way," she agreed. "No champagne flutes or silent auctions, but so much more actual impact." She gestured toward a young boy who was beaming at the clay sculpture he had just created. "That child's face is worth more than any donor recognition plaque." I studied her expression, still not entirely convinced of her transformation, but increasingly willing to believe it might be genuine. James always said philanthropy should be measured by changed lives, not tax deductions. He was right, Rebecca said quietly. "I just wish I had understood that sooner. All those years on the family foundation board, and we never once came to see the actual communities we claimed to serve." Her candor surprised me. In the months since she had broken with her family, Rebecca had gradually revealed more about the dysfunction at the heart of the Montgomery philanthropy. How decisions were made based on social connections and public recognition rather than genuine need or impact. "You're here now," I pointed out, "and you're helping to create something different." Before she could respond, Ray Mendoza approached us, his daughter Maria trailing slightly behind him. "Mrs. Montgomery, everything looks great. The kids are loving the space." "Thanks to your team's excellent work," I replied warmly. "And please, I've asked you to call me Emma." He smiled, then gently urged Maria forward. "My daughter wanted to show you something." Maria, a quiet 12-year-old with serious eyes, hesitantly handed me a folded piece of paper. "I made this for you," she said, "to say thank you for the art center." I unfolded what turned out to be a beautifully rendered pencil drawing of the building's facade, capturing not just the physical structure, but somehow the sense of possibility it represented. The detail was remarkable, especially for someone so young. "Maria, this is wonderful," I said, genuinely impressed. "You have real talent." She blushed at the praise. "Ms. Rivera said I could take the advanced drawing class even though I'm younger than the other students." "Of course you can," I assured her. "That's exactly why we created this place, so talent like yours can be developed, regardless of age or background." As Ray and Maria moved on to explore more of the center, Rebecca regarded me with newfound respect. "You're really good at this," she observed, "connecting with people, making them feel seen." I thought about her comment as the opening celebration continued around us. What Rebecca interpreted as a natural ability was actually something James and I had consciously cultivated together an approach to philanthropy that centered human connection above transactional giving. Unlike the Montgomerys, who viewed charitable work primarily as a social obligation and status marker, we had always emphasized direct engagement with the communities we hoped to serve. The weeks following the opening were a whirlwind of activity. Class enrollments exceeded our projections, necessitating additional sessions and instructors. The waiting list for certain programs grew so quickly that Miguel and I began discussing the possibility of opening a second location sooner than our original timeline had anticipated. We could look at the West Side neighborhood, Miguel suggested, during one of our weekly staff meetings. They've had even more severe cuts to arts education than this area, and there's an old community center building that's been sitting vacant for almost 2 years. What kind of condition is it in? I asked, making notes as we talked. Needs work, but the basic structure is sound, and it's actually owned by the city, so there might be partnership opportunities. I nodded, already thinking about how we might approach the city council with a proposal. Let's set up a time to tour the building. If it's viable, we could potentially have a second location operational by early next year. The foundation's rapid growth and visible impact had not gone unnoticed. Local media had covered the Arts Center opening, highlighting both the programs we offered and the contrast with traditional philanthropic approaches. One particularly pointed article had specifically mentioned the ongoing investigation into the Montgomery Family Foundation, noting the refreshing transparency and community focus of the Montgomery Clark Foundation, established by the widow of James Montgomery following his separation from the family's controversial charitable operations. The article had prompted a furious phone call from Catherine, James's sister-in-law, the first direct contact I'd had with any of the Montgomerys since our confrontational dinner months earlier. "How dare you drag the family name through this mud?" she had hissed when I answered. "Using James's death to promote yourself as some kind of charitable savior while smearing our foundation's reputation." I had remained calm in the face of her anger. "I didn't write the article, Catherine, and the investigation into your foundation is hardly my doing. That's the result of Peter's actions, not mine." "You've turned Rebecca against us," she accused, changing tactics. Filled her head with nonsense about community impact and transparency. "Rebecca makes her own decisions," I replied evenly, "and she's doing excellent work with our foundation." Catherine's bitter laugh crackled through the phone line. "Oh, I'm sure she is. Always the family disappointment, eager to prove she's better than the rest of us. Just wait, Emma. When she's gotten whatever she wants from you, she'll show her true colors. Montgomerys always look out for themselves in the end." After Catherine hung up, I sat at my desk for a long time, her warning echoing in my mind. Despite Rebecca's apparent transformation and her valuable contributions to the foundation, I couldn't completely dismiss the possibility that Catherine might be right. Family loyalty ran deep, and Rebecca had been a Montgomery far longer than she had been my colleague. That afternoon, I asked Mr. Winters to conduct a thorough review of Rebecca's work with the foundation, her access to financial information, her communications with donors, any potential vulnerabilities she might have created. It wasn't that. I expected to find evidence of sabotage or impropriety, but James had taught me the importance of verifying trust rather than simply granting it, especially where his family was concerned. "I'll be discreet," Mr. Winters assured me, "but thorough." His investigation revealed nothing concerning. Rebecca had maintained appropriate professional boundaries, had not accessed financial information beyond what her role required, and had actually brought in significant new donations through her social connections. If anything, she appeared to be working overtime to distance herself from her family's approach to philanthropy, emphasizing transparency and direct community impact in all her interactions. I was reflecting on Mr. Winters' report when Miguel knocked on my office door, his expression unusually serious. "We may have a situation," he said, closing the door behind him. "The city council member for the West Side neighborhood, Councilman Harris, is blocking our proposal for the community center building. On what grounds? I asked, surprised. Our initial meetings with city officials had been overwhelmingly positive. Officially, concerns about parking and neighborhood disruption. Miguel's tone made it clear he didn't believe these were the real issues. Unofficially, I just heard from a contact in the Parks Department that Peter Montgomery had a private meeting with Harris last week. The mention of Peter's name sent a wave of tension through me. After the dismissal of his legal claims against me and the ongoing investigation into his mismanagement of the family foundation, I had hoped he would retreat from any attempts to interfere with my life or work. Clearly, I had underestimated his determination to undermine me. What exactly is Harris saying? I asked, already mentally mapping potential approaches to the problem. That the neighborhood doesn't need outsiders coming in with grand plans, that the community center should be used for practical programs rather than frivolous arts education. Miguel's frustration was evident. Harris has always been pro-development, consistently voting for luxury condo projects in that same neighborhood. His sudden concern for community input is transparently political. I considered our options. Direct confrontation with a city council member would likely backfire, especially if Peter was whispering in his ear. But there were other ways to approach the situation. What about the neighborhood residents themselves? I asked. Have we connected with community leaders in the area? Miguel nodded. Several have expressed strong support for our proposal. The local elementary school principal is particularly enthusiastic. Their arts program was eliminated entirely 3 years ago. Then we need to amplify those voices, I decided. Let's organize a community forum, invite Councilman Harris to attend, and ensure that residents have the opportunity to express their views directly. The strategy required careful planning. Over the next 2 weeks, we worked with community partners to organize a forum at the Westside Elementary School. Flyers were distributed throughout the neighborhood, personal invitations extended to local business owners, church leaders, school officials, and of course, Councilman Harris and his staff. To my surprise, Rebecca proved particularly valuable in this effort. Her experience navigating city politics, gained through years of working with the Montgomery Family Foundation's civic initiatives, provided insight into the council's dynamics and Harris's particular pressure points. Harris is up for re-election next year, she explained during a planning meeting. He needs to appear responsive to community concerns, even while he caters to his major donors, including, historically, the Montgomery family. So, if enough community members vocally support our proposal, I began, he'll find it politically difficult to maintain his opposition, Rebecca confirmed, especially if there's media coverage of the forum. The evening of the community forum arrived, and I was heartened to see the elementary school auditorium filled to capacity. Parents, teachers, students, and community members packed the rows of seats, many holding handmade signs supporting arts education. Councilman Harris sat stiffly on the stage alongside other local officials, clearly unprepared for the turnout and visible community enthusiasm. I had deliberately taken a background role, allowing Miguel and our community partners to lead the presentation. This wasn't about me or the Montgomery name. It was about the neighborhood's needs and the opportunity our foundation could provide. Speaker after speaker approached the microphone to share personal stories about the impact of arts education cuts and the potential benefits of the proposed center. Maria Mendoza, now enrolled in 3 different classes at our first location, spoke eloquently about how access to art instruction had transformed her confidence and academic engagement. Her father stood proudly at the back of the room, nodding as she described her dream of becoming an art teacher herself someday. The most powerful moment came when Ms. Rivera invited several of her students to display artwork they had created at the first center. The quality and creativity of the pieces, created by children who had previously had no access to art instruction or materials, silenced even the most skeptical audience members. By the time Councilman Harris took the microphone, the community, sentiment was unmistakable. His prepared remarks, which had likely focused on concerns about outside interference, were hastily abandoned in favor of a more conciliatory approach. "I'm impressed by the passion I've heard tonight," he acknowledged, scanning the crowd. "While there are still logistical details to address, I believe we can find a path forward that serves this community's expressed interest in expanded arts, education." It wasn't an outright victory, but it was a significant shift from his previous opposition. As the forum concluded, I watched him speak with several community leaders, nodding and exchanging contact information. The pressure of public opinion, especially from voting constituents, had accomplished what private negotiation could not. As the crowd dispersed, I noticed a familiar figure slipping out a side door, Peter Montgomery. His presence confirmed my suspicions about his involvement in Harris's initial resistance, but also suggested he recognized his influence was waning in the face of community support. The knowledge that he had made the effort to attend, to witness our foundation's growing impact, gave me a complex satisfaction. This wasn't about defeating Peter or the Montgomery family. It was about fulfilling the vision James and I had shared. Still, there was undeniable vindication in seeing Peter retreat from a community that had so clearly chosen a different path than the one his family had historically dictated. Rebecca joined me as I gathered my belongings, her expression thoughtful. "Peter was here," she said quietly, confirming she had also seen her cousin. "I noticed," I replied, studying her reaction. Despite her months of apparent commitment to our foundation's work, I still wondered where her ultimate loyalties might lie when confronted directly with family pressure. "He texted me earlier," she admitted, showing me her phone screen with a message from Peter. "Attending your little community. Theater tonight. Last chance to remember where you belong." The implied threat was clear, as was Peter's disdain for our work. What surprised me was Rebecca's willingness to share the message, to be transparent about her continued connection to a family she had supposedly left behind. "And what did you tell him?" I asked carefully. "Nothing," she replied, pocketing her phone. "Some messages don't deserve responses. My work speaks for itself." Her answer satisfied me more than any profession of loyalty could have. Rebecca was proving through consistent action that she had truly broken with her family's values and approaches. Whatever Catherine might believe about Montgomery's always looking out for themselves, Rebecca appeared to have found a different path, one aligned with the vision James and I had created together. The community forum marked a turning point for our foundation. Councilman Harris's resistance crumbled in the face of public support, and within a month, the City Council approved our proposal to renovate and repurpose the West Side Community Center. Construction began immediately, with Ray Mendoza's company once again winning the contract based on their excellent work on our first location. As our public profile grew, so did the contrast with the Montgomery Family Foundation, which was struggling to maintain donor confidence amid the ongoing investigation into Peter's financial mismanagement. Several major corporate donors had publicly redirected their philanthropic giving to other organizations, including, in two notable cases, to our Montgomery Clark Foundation. The defection of these donors prompted another angry call, this time from William, James's cousin. Unlike Catherine's emotional outburst, William's approach was cold and calculating. "You're systematically destroying generations of family philanthropic work," he said without preamble when I answered. "These corporate relationships took decades to build." "The corporations made their own decisions," I pointed out, based on their assessment of which foundation better serves their philanthropic goals. "This isn't about philanthropy," William scoffed. "It's about your vendetta against James's family." His framing of the situation was so divorced from reality that I almost laughed. "William, I haven't approached a single Montgomery Family Foundation donor. They've come to us based on our demonstrated impact and transparent operations. If that highlights deficiencies in your foundation's approach, That's hardly my responsibility." "You've made an enemy of this family," he warned. "That's a decision you'll regret." After he hung up, I sat contemplating his words. The Montgomery family had already attempted to strip me of my inheritance, tarnish my reputation, and undermine my foundation's work. Their threats had lost their power to intimidate me. What William failed to understand was that each challenge they presented only strengthened my resolve to honor James's legacy by creating something fundamentally different from the Montgomery approach to wealth and influence. That evening, I visited our first art center during evening classes. The building hummed with activity, music from the practice rooms, animated discussions from the teen art criticism group, the rhythmic sounds of the dance class in the small performance space. In a quiet corner of the main studio, Zoe, the poor, hesitant teenager from our opening day, was patiently helping a younger child master brush techniques for acrylic painting. "You're becoming quite the teacher," I observed, watching how gently she guided the child's hand. Zoe smiled, her confidence visibly grown in the months since she had first reluctantly entered our center. "Ms. Rivera says I might be able to work as a teaching assistant next summer. There's even a scholarship program for seniors who want to study art education in college." "That's wonderful," I said, genuinely pleased by her transformation. "You'd be an excellent teacher." As we talked, I noticed Maria Mendoza across the room, deeply focused on a complex drawing. Next to her, several other students worked on their own projects, but occasionally glanced at her work with obvious admiration. In just a few months, she had emerged as a peer leader, her talent and dedication inspiring others around her. These were the victories that mattered, not the public recognition or donor acquisitions, but the individual transformations occurring daily within these walls. Each child discovering their voice, each young person finding community and purpose through creative expression. These were the true measures of our foundation's success. As I prepared to leave, Miguel approached with news about our second location. "Construction is ahead of schedule," he reported excitedly. "Ray's team is working overtime to get the renovations completed before winter sets in. We might be able to open in January instead of March. The accelerated timeline would allow us to begin serving the West Side neighborhood sooner than expected, expanding our impact and reaching more children who lacked access to arts education." It was exactly the kind of positive development that James would have celebrated, practical progress toward our shared vision. Driving home that evening, I reflected on how dramatically my life had changed since those dark days immediately following James's death. The Montgomery family's attempt to divide our possessions while I grieved had set in motion a sequence of events they could never have anticipated. Their assumption that I would be too broken by loss to defend what James and I had built together had fundamentally misjudged both my character and the strength of the partnership James and I had shared. The wealth they had so eagerly sought to claim was now being deployed in ways that directly challenged everything the Montgomery name had come to represent. Instead of exclusive galas and donor recognition plaques, our foundation created tangible opportunities for children who had been systematically excluded from arts education. Rather than maintaining the status quo that benefited the already privileged, we were actively working to transform access and opportunity across the city. As I pulled into my driveway, my phone chimed with a text from Rebecca. "Just heard from a contact at the Chronicle. They're doing a feature story on both foundations. Comparing approaches and impact. Thought you should know. The impending media coverage would likely further highlight the contrasts between the Montgomery Family Foundation and our work." Part of me felt a twinge of concern about escalating the already tense situation with James's family. But a stronger part recognized that transparency served our mission. The more people understood the direct impact of our approach, the more support we could generate for expanding our programs. I texted back a simple thank you, then sat in my car for a moment longer, thinking about how different my response would have been just a year earlier. The woman I had been then, newly widowed, initially uncertain how to navigate the world without. James beside me would have dreaded public scrutiny and potential conflict. But that woman had been transformed, not just by grief and its aftermath, but by the discovery of her own capacity to carry forward a shared vision, even in the face of determined opposition. What the Montgomerys had never understood about James, about us, was that the wealth they so coveted had never been our primary measure of success. The money was a tool, a means to create meaningful impact, not an end in itself. By attempting to claim that tool while I grieved, they had inadvertently accelerated its deployment toward purposes they had never valued or understood. As I finally entered my empty house, I felt James's absence as keenly as ever, but alongside, that enduring grief was a growing sense of purpose and fulfillment. The foundation we had planned together was taking shape in ways that exceeded even our initial vision, touching lives and creating opportunities that would outlast both of us. In their greedy attempt to divide our possessions, the Montgomerys had unknowingly set in motion the creation of a legacy far more valuable than the material wealth they had sought to claim. A legacy of transformed lives, expanded access, and meaningful opportunity. It was a form of wealth they had never understood or valued, but one that James and I had always recognized as the true measure of a life well lived. The Chronicle's feature article landed like a bombshell across the city's philanthropic community. Titled A Tale of Two Foundations, Tradition versus Transformation in the Montgomery Legacy, the piece presented a devastating comparison between the Montgomery Family Foundation and our Montgomery Clark Foundation. Through meticulous reporting, the journalist had documented the stark differences in our approaches, outcomes, and community impact. While the long-established Montgomery Family Foundation continues to focus on high-profile cultural institutions and exclusive fundraising galas, the article read, the newer Montgomery Clark Foundation has taken a radically different approach, directing resources toward neighborhoods traditionally overlooked by major philanthropic efforts and creating measurable impacts for underserved populations. The piece included interviews with students from our art centers, photographs of our programs in action, and data showing how many children we had reached in just our first year of operation. In contrast, the Montgomery Family Foundation was portrayed as increasingly disconnected from community needs, with the ongoing investigation into financial irregularities casting a shadow over their decades of influence in the city. My phone began ringing almost immediately after the article appeared online. Friends, colleagues, and even strangers called to express admiration for our work. Several potential donors reached out, interested in supporting our expansion plans. But the most surprising call came from an unexpected source, Edward Montgomery, James's father. Emma, his voice sounded older, more hesitant than I remembered. I've just read the Chronicle article. I held my breath, preparing for yet another Montgomery attack. Edward had remained largely in the background during the previous confrontations, allowing his children, particularly Peter, to lead the charge against me. But as the family patriarch, his influence remained significant. It seems, he continued slowly, that I may have misjudged the situation. His admission caught me completely off guard. Edward Montgomery was not a man known for acknowledging errors or reconsidering positions. In what way? I asked carefully. James always had. Different ideas about the family's responsibilities, Edward said. I dismissed them as youthful idealism, but seeing what you've accomplished with your foundation, the direct impact, the community engagement, it's given me cause to reflect. I remained silent, unsure where this conversation was heading. Edward had never shown any interest in our vision for philanthropy before. I wonder, he said finally, if you might be willing to meet with me. There are matters I'd like to discuss regarding the family's approach to charitable work. The request seemed genuine, but experience had taught me caution where the Montgomerys were concerned. I'd be open to meeting, I replied neutrally. May I ask what specifically you'd like to discuss? "The future," he said simply. "Both foundations bear the Montgomery name. Perhaps it's time we considered how they might complement rather than compete with each other." After scheduling a meeting for the following week, I immediately called Rebecca, who had been instrumental in helping me navigate the complex dynamics of the Montgomery family. "Edward reached out?" she repeated, clearly surprised. "That's unprecedented. Uncle Edward doesn't change course easily." "Do you think it's genuine?" I asked. "Or another attempt to undermine our work?" Rebecca was silent for a moment, considering. "The Chronicle article hit hard," she finally said. "Several board members have apparently questioned Peter's leadership, in light of the investigation and the negative publicity. Edward may be looking for a way to salvage the family's reputation." "Even if that means working with me?" I pressed. "The outsider they've spent the past year trying to discredit?" "Especially if it means working with you," Rebecca replied. "The Montgomery name has always been about maintaining appearances above all else. Your foundation is getting positive attention while theirs is surrounded by scandal. In Edward's mind, that might be reason enough to reconsider his position." The Montgomery family estate was located in the oldest, most prestigious neighborhood in the city, a sprawling property that had been in the family for generations. As I drove through, the ornate iron gates for my meeting with Edward, memories of uncomfortable family gatherings during my marriage to James, flooded back. This had never been a welcoming place for me. The outsider who had married into the family without the proper pedigree or connections. Edward's housekeeper, Mrs. Winters, met me at the door with the same cool politeness I remembered from previous visits. She led me through the formal entry hall, past portraits of Montgomery ancestors to Edward's study, a wood-paneled room filled with leather-bound books and hunting trophies that had always struck me as ostentatious rather than impressive. Edward rose slowly from behind his massive desk as I entered. At 78, he still cut an imposing figure, though I noticed a slight stoop to his shoulders that hadn't been there at James's funeral. "Emma," he said, extending his hand. "Thank you for coming." The formality of his greeting reflected our always distant relationship. Even during the 15 years of my marriage to James, Edward had maintained a cordial but cool demeanor toward me, never quite accepting me as a true member of the family. "Please sit." He gestured to one of the leather chairs facing his desk. Once we were both seated, he studied me with an intensity that reminded me painfully of James. Despite their different values and approaches to life, James had inherited his father's penetrating gaze. "You've created something remarkable," Edward began, nodding toward a copy of the Chronicle article on his desk. "James would be proud." The unexpected compliment momentarily disarmed me. Edward had never before acknowledged that James might approve of choices I had made without him. "Thank you," I said simply. "It was our shared vision." Edward nodded slowly. "Yes, I see that now. James spoke of his ideas for more direct community engagement, but I dismissed them as impractical. I was wrong. The admission seemed to cost him something." Edward Montgomery was not a man accustomed to acknowledging mistakes. "The family foundation has lost its way," he continued, his expression hardening. "Peter's actions have jeopardized decades of work and relationships. The investigation has revealed irregularities beyond what I initially understood." I remained silent, waiting for him to reach the point of this unexpected meeting. "I've removed Peter from his position," Edward said flatly. "The board voted unanimously yesterday. We've also engaged a forensic accounting firm to conduct a complete audit, separate from the official investigation." This news surprised me. Despite the public scandal, I had assumed the family would close ranks around Peter, as they had always done when faced with external criticism. "That must have been a difficult decision," I observed. Edward's mouth tightened. "Necessary, if the foundation is to survive. Which brings me to the purpose of asking you here today." He opened a folder on his desk, revealing what appeared to be legal documents. "I'm proposing a restructuring of the Montgomery Family Foundation," he explained. "One that would incorporate some of the approaches your foundation has pioneered, particularly regarding direct community engagement and transparent operations." I raised an eyebrow, skeptical of this sudden conversion. "And how exactly would that work?" "A partnership," Edward said directly, "not a merger. Both foundations would maintain their separate identities and governance, but a coordinated approach to certain initiatives, combining the Montgomery Family Foundation's historical relationships and resources with your foundation's community connections and innovative programs." The proposal was unexpected and intriguing. A partnership could potentially expand our impact significantly, allowing the Montgomery Clark Foundation to reach more communities and serve more children. But it could also entangle us with the very people who had tried to destroy me after James's death. "Why now?" I asked bluntly. "A year ago, your family was trying to strip me of everything James and I had built together. What's changed besides? Bad publicity?" Edward didn't flinch at my directness. "Several things," he replied. "The evidence of Peter's mismanagement, which was more extensive than I initially believed. The clear success of your approach, which the Chronicle documented convincingly. And..." He paused, seeming to weigh his next words carefully. "Conversations with Rebecca, who has made me reconsider some long-held assumptions." The mention of Rebecca surprised me. She had mentioned occasional contact with her uncle, but had never suggested she was advocating for a partnership between our foundations. "Rebecca has been quite eloquent about the impact of your work," Edward continued, "and quite critical of our family's traditional approach to philanthropy. Her perspective has been illuminating." I made a mental note to speak with Rebecca about these conversations. While I believed her commitment to our foundation was genuine, this new information raised questions about her ongoing relationship with the Montgomery family patriarch. "I appreciate your proposal," I said carefully, "but I would need to discuss this with my board and staff before considering any formal partnership. The Montgomery Clark Foundation operates on principles that are non-negotiable for me." Edward nodded, seeming to have expected this response. "Of course, I'm not asking for an immediate decision, only that you consider the possibility and perhaps allow me to visit your art centers to see the work firsthand." His request to visit our programs caught me off guard. Edward Montgomery, voluntarily stepping into the neighborhoods his family had traditionally ignored, to observe the very approach to philanthropy he had once dismissed as impractical, it seemed almost unbelievable. "You'd be welcome to visit," I said, still processing this apparent transformation. "Miguel Santos, our program director, could arrange a tour that would show the full scope of our work." As I drove away from the Montgomery estate later that afternoon, my mind raced with questions and possibilities. Was Edward's apparent change of heart genuine, or simply a strategic move to rehabilitate the Montgomery family's tarnished reputation? Could a partnership between our foundations actually work? Or would it inevitably compromise the principles James and I had established? I called Rebecca immediately, asking her to meet me at the foundation office as soon as possible. When she arrived, her expression was a mixture of apprehension and curiosity. "I'm guessing Uncle Edward mentioned our conversations," she said, as she settled into a chair across from my desk. "He did," I confirmed. "What I'm curious about is why you didn't mention them to me." Rebecca sighed, running a hand through her hair, a gesture so reminiscent of James that it momentarily caught me off guard. "I wasn't sure anything would come of it," she admitted. "Uncle Edward has always been set in his ways. I started visiting him after the Chronicle approached me for an interview for their article. I wanted to explain why I was working with your foundation, to help him understand the value of what we're doing." "And you advocated for a partnership between the foundations?" I pressed. "Not exactly," she replied. "I talked about our impact. the children we're reaching, the difference in approach. I suggested that both foundations could accomplish more by learning from each other. The partnership idea was his. I studied her expression, searching for any signs of the Montgomery family manipulation I had come to recognize. But Rebecca's face showed only honest concern and perhaps a touch of defensiveness at my questioning. "Do you think he's sincere?" I asked directly. Rebecca considered the question carefully before answering. "I think he's genuinely impressed by what you've built," she said slowly. "And I think he's truly disturbed by what Peter did. But Edward is also pragmatic. The Montgomery name means everything to him. If partnering with your successful foundation helps restore that name's reputation, that's a powerful motivation." Her assessment aligned with my own impressions. Edward's proposal likely stemmed from a combination of genuine respect for our work and practical concern for the Montgomery legacy. The question was whether those mixed motivations could translate into a partnership that served our mission rather than compromising it. "If we were to consider this," I mused, "we would need absolute guarantees of our foundation's independence and commitment to our core principles." Rebecca nodded. "Absolutely. And full transparency around all joint initiatives. No return to the old Montgomery approach of valuing recognition over impact." Her immediate focus on protecting our foundation's integrity reassured me somewhat about her loyalties. Whatever her ongoing relationship with her uncle, Rebecca seemed genuinely committed to the work we were doing and the approach we had established. The following week, Edward Montgomery visited both of our art centers, accompanied by Miguel and myself. Watching him observe our programs, children creating art, teenagers developing leadership skills through peer mentoring, parents participating in family workshops, I saw moments of genuine surprise and appreciation cross his normally impassive face. "The energy here," he commented as we walked through the bustling main studio of our original center. "It's remarkable." "And these are all neighborhood children?" "They are," Miguel confirmed proudly. Many had never had access to art materials or instruction before we opened. "That girl there?" He pointed to Maria Mendoza, who was helping younger children with a clay project. "She's been identified as exceptionally talented. We're already discussing scholarship opportunities for specialized summer programs." Edward watched as Maria patiently demonstrated a technique to a younger child, her confidence and skill evident even from a distance. "And you provide all this at no cost to the families?" he asked. "We use a sliding scale model," I explained. "Those who can contribute something do, but no child is ever turned away for financial reasons. It's central to our mission of expanding access." As we continued the tour, Edward asked increasingly specific questions about our operations, curriculum, teacher training, and community engagement strategies. His interest seemed genuine, not merely performative, and his sharp mind quickly grasped both the practical challenges and the philosophical underpinnings of our approach. At the Westside Center, which had recently opened, we encountered Ray Mendoza overseeing some final adjustments to the performance space acoustics. I introduced him to Edward, watching with interest as the contractor straightforwardly shook hands with the man whose family name adorned buildings throughout the city. Mr. Mendoza's company handled the renovations for both centers, I explained. His daughter Maria is one of our standout students. "The girl you pointed out earlier?" Edward asked, making the connection. "Impressive young lady." Ray nodded, his pride evident. "Thanks to these programs, she's talking about art school now. Something we never thought would be possible before." Edward engaged Ray in a detailed discussion about the building renovations, showing genuine interest in the practical challenges of transforming old commercial spaces into vibrant community arts centers. As they talked, I observed Edward's demeanor shift subtly from the formal, somewhat distant figure I had known during my marriage to James to someone more directly engaged with the people around him. After the tour concluded, Edward asked if we might speak privately. We settled in my small office at the Westside Center, a space deliberately designed to be functional rather than impressive. Very different from his wood-paneled study at the Montgomery estate. "I understand much better now," he said after a moment of silence. "James tried to explain his vision to me many times, but I never truly grasped what he meant until seeing it in action today." The mention of James brought a familiar pang. Even after all this time, hearing others speak of him could momentarily sharpen the sense of loss. James believed deeply in creating opportunity, not just funding institutions, I said quietly. Edward nodded slowly. He saw what I didn't, that our family's approach to philanthropy had become more about maintaining our position in society than about meaningful impact. He glanced out the window at the children playing in the small courtyard behind the center. We lost our way somewhere along the line. His candor surprised me. Throughout my marriage to James, Edward had always presented as absolutely certain of his views and approaches, dismissive of alternatives, particularly those suggested by his unconventional younger son. "It's not too late to reconsider that approach," I offered cautiously. "No, it isn't," he agreed, "which is why I hope you'll give serious thought to the partnership I've proposed. I believe both foundations could benefit, yours from the additional resources and relationships we can provide, ours from your innovative approaches and community connections." I studied him carefully, searching for signs of the manipulation that had characterized my previous interactions with the Montgomery family. But Edward's expression showed only sincerity and perhaps a hint of something unexpected: regret. "I'll discuss it with our board," I promised, "but I need to be clear. Any partnership would have to preserve the core principles of the Montgomery Clark Foundation. We won't compromise on accessibility, community engagement, or transparent operations." "I wouldn't expect you to," Edward replied. "Those principles are precisely what made your foundation successful while ours faltered." As he rose to leave, Edward hesitated, then added, "James chose well, Emma. I was too blind to see it at the time, but he knew exactly what he was doing when he married you." The unexpected acknowledgement left me momentarily speechless. In all the years I had known him, Edward had never before directly approved of James's choice to marry me. "Thank you," I managed finally. "That means a great deal to me." After Edward departed, I remained in my office, contemplating the dramatic shift in our relationship. From adversary to potential ally in the span of a few months. It was a transformation I could never have anticipated during those dark days after James's death, when his family had attempted to strip me of everything we had built together. The following morning, I convened an emergency meeting of our foundation's board to discuss Edward's partnership proposal. The reactions were mixed, with some members immediately skeptical of any collaboration with the Montgomery Family Foundation given our history. "How can we trust them after everything they did?" asked Lisa Chen, one of our most passionate board members. "This could be another attempt to undermine our work or co-opt it for their reputation rehabilitation." Others saw potential benefits in the proposed partnership. "Their resources and connections could help us expand much faster than we could alone," noted Dr. Rivera, a respected education advocate who had been one of our earliest supporters. "If we maintain control over program implementation, their financial support could allow us to reach many more children." The debate continued for nearly 2 hours, with valid points raised on both sides. Throughout the discussion, I shared my observations from Edward's visit and my assessment of his apparent change of heart, while acknowledging the very real risks of engaging with a family that had previously attempted to destroy me. "What about Rebecca?" asked Miguel, who had remained mostly silent during the debate. "She's worked closely with us for months now, and she knows her family better than anyone. What's her perspective?" All eyes turned to Rebecca, who had deliberately recused herself from much of the discussion due to her family connections. "I believe Uncle Edward is sincere," she said carefully. "His removal of Peter from leadership wasn't just for show. It represents a genuine recognition that the foundation needs to change. That said, she continued, looking directly at me, the Montgomery approach to philanthropy is deeply ingrained. Any partnership would require constant vigilance to prevent slipping back into old patterns. Her balanced assessment seemed to resonate with the board members. After further discussion, we agreed to establish a committee to explore the possibility of a limited partnership focused on specific initiatives, a cautious step that would allow us to test the waters without compromising our core mission or independence. As the meeting concluded, Rebecca approached me privately. "There's something else you should know," she said quietly. "Uncle Edward has been diagnosed with early-stage heart disease. It's not immediately life-threatening, but it's made him reflect on his legacy in a way he hasn't before. I think that's part of what's driving this reconciliation attempt." The information added another dimension to Edward's unexpected outreach. Mortality has a way of clarifying priorities, of stripping away pretense and highlighting what truly matters. Perhaps facing his own health challenges had given Edward a new perspective on the family conflicts and philanthropic approach he had long championed. That evening, as I reviewed the meeting notes and began drafting potential parameters for a limited partnership with the Montgomery Family Foundation, I found myself reflecting on how dramatically circumstances had changed since James's death. The family that had once united against me, attempting to claim what James and I had built together, was now fractured. Peter removed from power, Rebecca working directly with me, and Edward seeking collaboration rather than confrontation. Their attempts to divide our possessions while I grieved had ultimately led to a division within their own ranks, a reckoning with long-established patterns and approaches that James had questioned throughout his life. It was an outcome none of them could have anticipated when they gathered in my home after the funeral, cataloging items and preparing to strip me of my inheritance. The wealth James and I had protected from their grasp was now flowing into programs and opportunities that challenged everything the Montgomery name had traditionally represented. And ironically, it was those very programs, the direct community impact, the transparent operations, the focus on accessibility rather than exclusivity, that had eventually brought Edward Montgomery to my office, seeking partnership rather than continuing as adversaries. The following week, I met with Edward again, this time at our foundation headquarters. I presented the board's proposal for a limited partnership focused initially on a joint scholarship program for exceptionally talented students from our art centers who wish to pursue advanced training or college education in the arts. This would combine our expertise in identifying and nurturing emerging talent with your foundation's established relationships with major arts institutions and universities, I explained, indicating the detailed proposal we had prepared. It allows us to test our ability to work together on a discrete project with clear goals and metrics for success. Edward reviewed the documents carefully, his expression thoughtful. A prudent approach, he acknowledged, and a meaningful initiative that serves both foundations' interests while directly benefiting talented young people. His ready acceptance of our cautious proposal further convinced me that his change of heart might indeed be genuine. The Edward Montgomery I had known during my marriage to James would have insisted on a more sweeping partnership that centered the Montgomery name and influence. This Edward seemed willing to earn trust gradually, to prove his commitment to a different approach. "There is one additional matter I'd like to discuss," Edward said as we concluded our meeting. "A personal one, not directly related to the foundations." I nodded, curious but wary. "I've been reflecting on how the family treated you after James's death," he continued, his voice uncharacteristically hesitant. "It was unconscionable, particularly given the circumstances of your loss." His acknowledgement of their behavior caught me off guard. None of the Montgomerys had previously expressed any regret for their attempts to strip me of my inheritance while I grieved. "Peter led the charge," Edward admitted, "but I allowed it. Worse, I tacitly approved it, believing James had made a mistake in entrusting you with the family's assets. He met my gaze directly. I was wrong, and I owe you an apology. The unexpected admission left me momentarily speechless. After all the pain, all the legal battles, all the attempts to undermine and isolate me, this simple acknowledgement of wrongdoing felt almost surreal. "Thank you," I said finally, finding myself genuinely moved by his humility. "That means a great deal to me." Edward nodded, seeming relieved by my acceptance. "I've made many mistakes in my life, Emma. Misjudging you, and James's wisdom in choosing you, ranks among my most significant. I hope this partnership might begin to address that error, though I know it can't undo the pain my family caused you." As he rose to leave, Edward hesitated, then added, "James would be proud of how you've protected and expanded his legacy. I regret that it took me so long to see what he saw in you from the beginning." After he departed, I sat alone in my office, processing the unexpected turn our relationship had taken. From adversary to ally, from dismissive patriarch to respectful colleague, Edward's transformation seemed as genuine as it was surprising. The journey from those dark days after James's death to this moment of potential reconciliation had been neither straight nor easy. The path had been marked by legal battles, public confrontations, and private moments of doubt and determination. But through it all, the vision James and I had shared had remained my North Star, a commitment to using our resources to create meaningful opportunities for those who had been systematically excluded from them. The wealth his family had so eagerly sought to claim while I grieved had been transformed into something they had never valued or understood. Direct impact on individual lives, communities empowered through access and opportunity, a legacy measured in changed trajectories rather than family prestige. As I prepared for our foundation's upcoming board meeting, where we would finalize the details of our limited partnership with the Montgomery Family Foundation, I felt a sense of completion that had eluded me since James's death. Not an end to grief. That remained a companion, sometimes distant, sometimes close. But a recognition that the journey his death had forced me to undertake had led to outcomes neither of us could have anticipated. In their haste to divide our possessions, the Montgomerys had inadvertently set in motion a transformation, not just of the wealth they coveted, but of the very meaning of the Montgomery name and legacy. And in that transformation, I had discovered strengths and capacities within myself that might have remained dormant had circumstances been different. The woman who had once been dismissed as merely James's wife, too naive to protect her interests, too grief-stricken to fight back, had become a force for change in her own right, carrying forward a shared vision with determination and purpose that had ultimately brought even the formidable Edward Montgomery to acknowledge his errors and seek reconciliation. It was not the path either James or I would have chosen, but it was the one that had been thrust upon me, and in walking it, I had found not just survival, but a kind of triumph, not over the Montgomerys, but over the limitations they had assumed would define me in James's absence. The wealth I had protected from their grasp while grieving had become the foundation for something far more valuable than material possessions, a living legacy that honored James's memory by creating the change we had both believed possible in the world. 2 years after James's death, I stood at the podium in the Grand Hall of the Montgomery Museum of Contemporary Art, surveying the crowd gathered for the inaugural presentation of the Montgomery Clark Young Artist Scholarship Awards. The partnership between our foundation and the Montgomery Family Foundation had evolved beyond what any of us had initially imagined possible, creating opportunities neither organization could have achieved alone. The scholarship program, our first joint initiative, had identified 20 exceptional young artists from our community centers, providing them with advanced training, mentorship, and educational opportunities that would have been unattainable without this collaboration. Tonight, their artwork hung in the prestigious gallery spaces of a museum that had previously showcased only established artists, challenging perceptions and expanding the institution's relevance to the broader community. Edward sat in the front row, his health visibly improved since beginning treatment for his heart condition. Beside him sat Rebecca, who had blossomed in her role overseeing community engagement for both foundations. The transformation in both of them, from embodiments of Montgomery elitism to advocates for accessibility and opportunity, remained one of the most unexpected outcomes of our turbulent journey. Welcome to the celebration of extraordinary talent and new beginnings, I began, my voice steady as I addressed the assembled guests. 2 years ago, few would have imagined the Montgomery and Clark names united in common purpose, least of all me. A knowing chuckle rippled through the audience, many of whom were familiar with the very public conflict that had preceded our unlikely partnership. Yet, here we stand, surrounded by the work of young artists whose talent might have remained undiscovered without the programs we've built together. Their achievements represent not just individual potential realized, but a new model of philanthropy for our city, one that combines established resources with innovative approaches to create meaningful change. As I spoke, I caught sight of Maria Mendoza, now 14 and already receiving attention from major art schools. Her father, Ray, stood proudly nearby, watching as museum patrons admired his daughter's striking mixed-media piece, exploring cultural identity and belonging. What had begun as a simple drawing class had blossomed into a transformation that would shape her entire future. When we first proposed this partnership, many were skeptical, I continued, acknowledging the doubts that had surrounded our collaboration. Could organizations with such different histories and approaches truly work together effectively? Could the Montgomery name represent both tradition and innovation, exclusivity and accessibility? I gestured toward the gallery walls, where the students' artwork commanded attention alongside pieces from the museum's permanent collection. The evidence of our success surrounds us, not just in these exceptional works of art, but in the changed trajectories of the young people who created them. After introducing several student artists, who spoke eloquently about the impact of our programs on their lives and aspirations, I invited Edward to join me at the podium. Our public appearances together still raised eyebrows among those who remembered the Montgomery family's attempts to disinherit me after James's death, but we had gradually built a working relationship based on mutual respect and shared goals. My son James had a vision for philanthropy that I failed to understand during his lifetime, Edward said, his voice carrying the weight of hard-earned wisdom. He believed that true impact was measured not in buildings named or galas attended, but in lives transformed through opportunity and access. Thanks to Emma's determination and leadership, that vision has become reality in ways that have transformed not just our community, but our understanding of the Montgomery legacy itself. His public acknowledgement of James's vision, and my role in fulfilling it, represented a profound shift from the man who had once tacitly supported his family's attempts to strip me of everything James and I had built together. The journey from adversary to ally had been neither straightforward nor easy, but the results spoke for themselves in the opportunities we had created together. After the presentations concluded, I mingled with guests, accepting congratulations and discussing future initiatives. The success of our scholarship program had attracted substantial new funding, allowing us to expand to additional neighborhoods and art forms. What had begun as a cautious test of our ability to collaborate had evolved into a model partnership that leveraged the strengths of both foundations. "You've achieved something remarkable here," observed Helen, my oldest friend, who had stood by me throughout the darkest days after James's death. "Not just the programs themselves, but this reconciliation. I never thought I'd see Edward Montgomery publicly praising your leadership." "Nor did I admitted, watching as Edward engaged thoughtfully with one of our student artists, listening intently to her explanation of her creative process. "Life takes unexpected turns." Speaking of unexpected, Helen said, lowering her voice slightly, have you heard that Peter is back in town? The mention of James's brother, the architect of so much pain during my early grief, sent a familiar tension through me. After his removal from the family foundation leadership and the subsequent legal consequences of his financial mismanagement, Peter had retreated to Europe, maintaining a low profile while the scandal gradually faded from public memory. No, I replied carefully. I hadn't heard. Apparently, he's seeking some kind of reconciliation with Edward, Helen continued. Rebecca mentioned he's been reaching out, claiming to have changed during his time away. The news was unsettling. Peter's manipulation and greed had nearly destroyed both me and the Montgomery Family Foundation. His return represented a potential threat to everything we had built since his departure. Emma. The familiar voice behind me sent a chill down my spine. I turned to find Peter Montgomery standing just a few feet away, older and somewhat diminished. From the arrogant figure who had once sat behind James's desk, dividing our possessions while I grieved. Peter, I acknowledged coolly, noting Helen's protective step closer to my side. This is unexpected. I'm sure it is, he agreed, his tone lacking the condescension I remembered. I wasn't certain I'd be welcomed, but I wanted to see the exhibition. The partnership between the foundations. It's impressive. His apparent humility caught me off guard. The Peter I had known would have entered with demands and entitlement, not quiet observation and measured compliments. Thank you, I replied neutrally, still wary of his intentions. It's been a successful collaboration. I've been following the press coverage from abroad, he continued, glancing around at the student artwork. What you've built here, it's what James always talked about, isn't it? Direct impact, nurturing talent that would otherwise be overlooked. The accurate assessment of James's vision, coming from the brother who had dismissed it as naive idealism throughout his lifetime, was startling. Either Peter had undergone a genuine transformation during his exile, or he had become a more sophisticated manipulator. Yes, I confirmed simply. It is exactly what James envisioned. An awkward silence fell between us, filled with unspoken history. His attempts to steal my inheritance, the investigation that had exposed his financial misconduct, the family, fractures that had resulted from his actions. I owe you an apology, Emma, Peter finally said, his voice lower. My behavior after James's death was indefensible. I was wrong, and the consequences of my actions have given me ample time to reflect on that fact. I studied his face, searching for signs of the calculation and entitlement I had come to associate with him. Instead, I saw something unexpected, what appeared to be genuine regret, etched alongside the new lines of age and difficulty. That's appreciated, I managed, not quite ready to offer forgiveness, but acknowledging his attempt at amends. Your father has become an important partner in our work. Peter nodded, his expression complicated. So I've heard, another surprising development in a series of many. He hesitated, then added, I'm not seeking to insert myself into what you've built. I just wanted to see it firsthand, to understand what James saw that the rest of us missed for so long. Before I could respond, Edward approached, his reaction to his son's presence revealing that this appearance was indeed unexpected. Peter, he said, his tone carefully controlled. I wasn't aware you would be attending. I didn't want to disrupt the evening, Peter replied, a new deference in his manner toward his father. I'll be in town for a few weeks. Perhaps we could speak privately another time. Edward gave a short nod, neither embracing nor rejecting the suggestion. Perhaps. Tonight is about celebrating these young artists and the partnership that has made their opportunities possible. The subtle reminder of priorities, placing the Foundation's work above family drama, reflected how profoundly Edward's perspective had shifted since our unlikely alliance began. The Montgomery patriarch who had once prioritized family loyalty, above all else now recognized the greater importance of the impact we were creating together. As Peter moved away, melting into the crowd of attendees, I exchanged a meaningful glance with Edward. The unspoken question hung between us. Could Peter's apparent change of heart be genuine? Or was it merely another attempt to rehabilitate his position within the family, and perhaps gain access to the resources and influence he had lost? One challenge at a time, Edward said quietly, seeming to read my thoughts. Tonight, we celebrate what works. Tomorrow, we can address what remains broken. His pragmatic approach resonated with the lessons of the past 2 years. Our partnership had succeeded by focusing first on shared goals and demonstrable impact, building trust gradually through concrete results rather than promises or assumptions. If Peter's transformation was genuine, it would reveal itself through consistent actions, not merely apologetic words at a public event. As the evening drew to a close, I found myself standing alone in the gallery after most guests had departed, studying Maria Mendoza's artwork, a powerful piece that combined technical skill with profound emotional insight. From initial hesitant sketches in our first community center to this museum-worthy work in just 2 years, her journey embodied everything James and I had hoped to make possible. "He would be so proud," Rebecca said softly, joining me in contemplation of the piece. "Not just of the foundation, but of you, of how you've transformed his vision into something even more meaningful than either of you initially imagined." Her words touched the grief that still lived alongside my sense of accomplishment, the enduring wish that James could witness what his legacy had become, that he could see the lives changed through the work we had planned together. "I think he would be proud of all of us," I replied, including her in the assessment, of how adversity revealed capacities none of us knew we possessed. As we prepared to leave the gallery, Edward approached with a final observation that captured the essence of our unlikely journey. "When my family attempted to divide your possessions while you grieved," he said thoughtfully, "none of us understood that the most valuable asset James left behind wasn't material at all. It was his vision and his faith in your ability to realize it." The simple truth of his statement resonated deeply. The wealth I had protected from their grasp had indeed been transformed into something far more significant than mere possessions, a living legacy that would continue to create opportunity and possibility long after all of us were gone. In their rush to claim what they could see and count, the Montgomerys had overlooked the invisible inheritance that truly mattered, the shared vision and values that no legal maneuver could ever have taken from me. And in protecting that inheritance, I had not only honored James's memory, but discovered strengths within myself that grief might otherwise have obscured. The woman who had once been dismissed as too naive to protect her interests had become the architect of transformation, not just for herself, but for an entire approach to philanthropy, and, ultimately, for the very family that had once sought to defeat her. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.